Okay, so welcome back and good morning to you all. I just want to remind us of what the world of Eden actually was like. Okay, first of all, of course, we've got a water bubble or a canopy around the earth of some sort. Okay, and this is having various effects. It means that there's no seasons or weather patterns. Okay, because it's like a greenhouse, and also, of course, you've got no ice caps, so the environment was pretty much the same all over. And indeed, we spoke at one point about the frozen forest on Antarctica. How on earth did that get there? I think we know if we believe the Bible. And of course, the most visible difference is that there's a huge continent and only a small sea, because most of the water is up in space. And indeed, of course, it would have been a very different place day to day, because of course you've got dinosaurs and all animals that have ever lived all at the same time. Okay, now people will say, oh, but dinosaurs haven't lived for millions of years. This is people playing with words, because of course dinosaur just means terrible lizard, um, and they are reptiles. Elsewhere they're sometimes called dragons or lizards, and it all just depends what language you're talking in, you know. But it's the case that sometimes we use different words from different languages to say something. It doesn't mean that it's in any way different just because we're being clever with the words. All right. You think about the borrowed words that you've borrowed from other languages, and you're not saying anything different. You see, they'll say dinosaurs haven't lived for years, but reptiles have. We've got crocodiles, and actually they're around now. You can just see them in the local zoo, and they're no different biologically from dinosaurs. Uh, People have a perception that dinosaurs are huge and that reptiles are somehow small, but actually the average size of a dinosaur was only that of a dog, a large dog. We think of the big dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus and the Brontosaurus and things like that, and we don't think of the crocodiles as being exactly the same biologically, just because they're smaller, or lizards, or a little, you might have a gecko or something as a pet. It's still a dinosaur. Just because it's small doesn't mean it's not. And it's also interesting, of course, that throughout history there have been many myths. And of course, we use the word myth and we think of a fairy tale, something that's not real or something that's made up. Well, it may have been embellished, but often these stories have a basis in truth. These stories about a man going out and fighting a dragon. Actually, of course, by description, you find out that actually it's a dinosaur. And it's remarkable how many bits of information there are, like the Ica stones, where there are drawings of dinosaurs. There was that lovely one where there's a picture of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it's got circles down the side, and they said, well, it's probably just a made-up animal. And then they dug up some Tyrannosaurus Rex with a skin, and it had circles down the side. It shows that men have seen these things. And of course, biblically, we think about Job, the descriptions of the behemoth and the leviathan, and they fit the description perfectly. In the footnotes in my Bible, it says underneath that it might be a hippo, but a hippo does not have a tail as thick as a cedar. A cedar is a big tree trunk that you can't get your arms around. So we're looking at an animal a lot bigger than a hippopotamus. All right. Here's a dinosaur. This is a Komodo dragon. Okay, and it's a dinosaur. It's 3 meters long, and as you can see, they've lived with men. They are still alive today. By the way, I've borrowed most of these materials from other websites, and creationist websites and scientific websites. I'm not doing this for commercial reasons, so I hope that they don't mind. But please, I recommend that you go to those websites and look these up for yourself. Okay. Here's a footprint from a dinosaur crossed over with a human footprint. Okay, it's very clear. Unfortunately, this particular stone was a loose stone, and so they couldn't positively verify which layer of stone it came from. But you can see it's stone, so it's got to be of some age, hasn't it? It's the fact that it's actually a remarkably clear fossil. Okay, there's been lots of debates about this. Is it too clear? Is it a forgery? It's interesting that some footprints were found that were not very clear, and they were rejected by evolutionists because they said they're not clear enough. And then clearer fossils are found, and they say, oh, they're too clear, they must be a forgery. There's no pleasing some people. These footprints here, very interesting. I'd recommend that you go to this website and have a look. I've just borrowed this, just a little collection of certain things which I rather liked. It's all there, and these are in layers of rock where other fossils have been found and they've been dated to so many millions or whatever, and yet they've got human footprints in. Here's a cat footprint, okay, again in a layer. Again, it was accused of being a forgery, so the idea was that it was somehow carved out. Well, if you carve through something, then you cut through the layers in the rock. Just like if you have a piece of plywood and you carve into it, then you will cut through layers and you end up with a sort of contour around each one. But this one was sliced in half, and as you can see, the mud has been pressed down by the footprint of the cat. Okay, so clearly it's not been carved. Right. Here's another one. Again, this is one of those that they said is too clear. It's too clear, so it can't be for real. But these footprints are around from mammals at the same time as the dinosaurs. Here's a fossilized finger, and just to prove that it really is a finger, not just a fluke, there's a cross section, and you can see the outline of the bone in the actual flesh. This is interesting. This was in a layer of rock that was dated to, I can't remember, X number of million of years. It's in a copper mine, and they were digging through and they found these. These are particularly remarkable because not only are they clearly human, they are also articulated, which means that they were buried when they were either alive or just dead, because otherwise they get scattered, as you know, very quickly. And that's the thing about fossils, they have to be formed very quickly. And these stones contain these bones which are very clearly human when you look at the anatomy. And when you look at the details, it really does match up nicely. And you can see that these people are buried, even though the rock was previously dated at a very old age. As you can see, this is a femur, a thigh bone. And you may say, well, that's a fluke. It could be from some other animal that was just very, very similar. But you're not going to get away with that on this picture. Here you can see the human jaw, correct number of teeth, correct layout. It's clearly human, and yet it's in a layer of copper, hence the green and blue colouring. All right. And this is a thing about the arguments about the age of rocks. People will say, oh, but they're in a layer of rocks that's from millions of years ago, so clearly these animals lived millions of years ago. I say, well, how do you know that that rock is millions of years old? And I say, because it's got animals in it that lived from millions of years ago. That's a circular argument. So the age of the rock is set by the animals in it, and the age of the animals is set by the rock that it's in. It's a circular argument. It goes round and round. And actually the whole thing about fossils is that they have to be formed very quickly. I've seen fossilized fish and even jellyfish. How long does it take them to rot? It only takes a short time for those to rot and for the bones to fall apart and they get scattered. Any animal that falls into the bottom of a pond or sea is eaten before it even gets to the bottom, quite frankly. You can watch a time lapse of a whale carcass that was killed by killer whales in the sea. By the time it even got to the bottom, it was half gone, and in no time at all it was just a mass of bones. So fossils must be formed in a mudslide. This, the old picture that I was given when I was at school was that the animals floated to the bottom and then silt would just wash over them and it would form a fossil. It can't, because the animal rots before that happens. And so actually fossilization has to happen quickly, especially when you're talking about these animal graveyards. Quite clearly it's being caused by a mud tsunami, a mud tidal wave. And the extraordinary thing is that it's all over the world. Okay, and also fossilization has been proven to happen quite quickly. This is a remarkable fossil, isn't it? Okay, how many millions of years old do you think this is? This is a boot. Okay, clearly somebody had a leg ripped off or blown off, and it fell into the right conditions whereby it got fossilized in water. It doesn't always get fossilized in mud, okay, because if the water has the right chemicals in it, particularly those washed out from limestone, then it can fossilize. And indeed there are places in Yorkshire where you can go and you can hang things up on a string, and you can come back a few weeks later and they're fossilized. I've always wanted to get a side of bacon and hang that up there and see how hard it went, because my father-in-law loves a bit of dry cured bacon, and I'd just like to watch him trying to cut it with a hacksaw because it's solid stone. It's quite a tourist attraction, and this is well known. Okay, so the usual line that is washed over us with evolutionists, that these things have happened over millions of years. Actually, things happen very quickly, in a very short space of time, and there's evidence around that things have happened, indeed cataclysmically. Okay, now this is a polystrate tree. Polystrate means many layers. Okay, as you can see, it goes through many layers of rock, and this is one of the things. You can see the roots at the bottom, in the layer of coal, because this is from a coal mine or quarry. And they're digging through to the coal mine, and often when they're in the coal mines, polystrate trees will drop down from above. Okay, you can see that the tree trunk has, for the large part, had its branches stripped off, which implies that something, pretty drastic happened to this tree, and it's been buried in layers and layers and layers of rock. Now, according to the pattern or the model that's presented to us, layers of rock have laid down over thousands of years, and so when you dig down deep, then you're millions of years in the past, and the more recent layers are on the top. How did this tree grow for millions of years through all these layers? And when you think about this, you actually start to think, hang on a sec, all of that rock from the bottom to the top must be the same age, because it's all been laid down in one go. And yet many of these strata are often named as being thousands of years or millions of years from layer to layer, but the tree would have rotted away if it had been growing there for that long, or it would have grown old and died. And quite clearly that's just not what happened. Quite clearly what's happened is that there was a tree growing and it was buried by a huge landslide. And this is a thing, when they're digging down through these layers, they're not going down through millions of years. Often they're going through no time at all. Okay, here's another fossil. Interesting one, isn't it? Okay, an iron hammerhead. Okay, and it's got a wooden handle that's set through the hammer. Okay, this is clearly man-made, and yet it's in a layer of rock that was dated at millions of years. Okay, this has to be man-made. So were men around millions of years ago, or maybe we should reject the evolutionary timescale, the idea of billions of years. Another thing, in limestone caves you get stalagmites and stalactites, these icicles, these big carrots coming down from the roof and up from the floor, where the water is dripping and it leaves a layer of sediment or minerals. What's interesting is, of course, we're told that these things take thousands upon thousands of years, but here a bat has died on the top of one of these things and it's been encased. Quite clearly that's happened in a short space of time. I was rather shocked when I went to Danirogoff caves in Wales, and there was a chart there which explained that the stalactite the size of a finger was 1,000 years old or something like that, and the one that was 6 inches long, the size of a carrot, was 20,000, or I can't remember what it said, 100,000 or whatever else it was, and it went down to one of these huge ones that was the size of a man, and it said like 1,000,000 years or something like that. I can't remember the figures, but the point was that right next to it, there's, in fact, on the sign itself, I remember seeing a stalactite that was the size of a carrot. And as you can see here on this metal cage, these have already been encased in limestone. What's interesting is this: according to the chart, then that means that perspex sign with English and Welsh on it must be at least tens of thousands of years old. So a Neanderthal man, as they try to portray him, clearly knew how to write in English on perspex, even before the Welsh language had even been formed, and he was writing in English. It just becomes farcical, because you can see that the evidence before their very eyes completely confounds their theory, and it shows that it's just not right. Here's a picture of my little girl next to some stalactites, and you can see how they're forming on the cage, and it just proves that the whole theory is complete fantasy, you know, and I think that's important, you know. I'm going to stop there for today, but next time we're going to go on to this and have a look at mankind, and, you know, rethink some of the patterns that we've been used to following.